Добрый день.
Good afternoon. I welcome everyone at the press center of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. With us today we have Russian foreign correspondents. We begin from the minister's schedule, Sergey Lavrov's schedule. On the 31st of March in Moscow, the head of the Foreign Ministry of Russian Federation will take part in the general meeting of the Russian National Affairs Council. According to tradition, during the holding of this yearly meeting, participants will take stock of the work of the Council in 2025 and outline the priorities and contours of the work of the organization in the current year 2026. Special attention will be given to the issues of human resources and ensuring the work of the Council. At the meeting with the members of this Council, the Minister will take note of the situation in the world today and explain the key foreign policy initiatives of Russia. Now on to relevant international agenda. The situation around Ukraine, guided by the British EU attitudes regarding the escalation of regional tensions, the Kiev regime is trying to use NATO weaponry to increase the intensity of strikes far beyond the conflict line, choosing especially vulnerable categories of peaceful population, civilian, educational, and healthcare and transport energy infrastructure of Russia. In the recent week, the terrorist attacks of the AFU supported by the West have resulted in the deaths of more than 100 and resulted in injuries of 133 people, including 10 children. 14 people died. And now I would like to give examples. In the Republic of Adygea, in the village of NM, on the 18th of March, the UAV strike resulted in injuries of 2 girls. In the Republic of Bashkortostan, on March 21st, the UAV strike against the house under construction resulted in the injuries of 2 workers. In the Belgorod region, in March 19th to 22nd, in the village of Oktyabrski, the use of military drones results in the injuries of 13 civilians, including a local medical officer and a driver of the ambulance. In the village of Murom, 1 person was killed. In the villages of Smorodino, 2 bomb strikes resulted in destruction of a post office and food store. 5 private houses were damaged. 4 local civilians were killed, and 1 more woman was hospitalized in a very dangerous condition for her health. In the Bryansk region, the AFU on 20th of March struck the second neurological center in Suzem, and 1 employee was injured. In the DPR, the AFU struck a facility of Novoroshan Railways, resulting in the deaths of a 40-year-old locomotive driver and his 25-year-old assistant. In the Zaporozhye region, 8 civilians were injured as a result of strikes from March 19th to 22nd. In the Krasnodar Krai, the UAV strike against a multi-story civilian building resulted in the death of a 25-year-old woman. In the LPR, in the village of Verokrakino, on March 19th, the direct strike of UAV resulted in the injuries of 15 employees. In Sevastopol, on 19th of March, the direct strike by drone against a civilian house resulted in the death of a 30-year-old man, and another two people were injured. In the Kherson region, on the 18th of March, the AFU have launched a strike against kindergarten in the village of Mikhailovka. The 25 people were evacuated, including 30 children. Fortunately, no one was injured. The Russian law enforcement agency continued the investigation of crimes of the AFU and foreign mercenaries. As of 19th of March, the courts have gone through 1,107 criminal cases. 75 people have been given life sentences. They have been accusations raised against AFU militants Sergey Olenik, Vasily Ivanitsky, Anton Zaitsev, and Vladimir Semiluta, who participated in the armed incursion against the regions in the Kursk region and who have been detained during the combat. An in absentia punishment in the form of 25 years in prison was a sentence was given to Dmitry Antonuk, who was accused of having organized terrorist attacks in the Belgorod, Bryansk, and Kaluga region in the interest of Ukrainian special services. That at this backdrop, Zelensky continues his tour of Europe, this time to remind everyone of his significance against the backdrop of the events in the Middle East, and as well as to ask for more money and military aid to continue murdering as many of his compatriots as he can. And on March 17th, he visited London when he was received by King Charles III. He made a speech in the parliament and held close negotiations with the Prime Minister Keir Starmer and the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. The lawmakers of the UK were presented with the advertisement of by this person who is responsible for daily attacks against people and children. He was received by the British Parliament, and we remember in Canada they were so clamoring for the former Nazi accomplice Gunka, and now they are celebrating another war criminal. He shared their new experience of the AFU as in the use of tactical means of conducting modern war, eager to share experience and serve as a military, industrial, and innovation cluster for the entirety of the West and other potential buyers. They know that Zelensky has blood in his hands. He is just neck deep in blood of civilians, and he is a bloody bunker terrorist. And to listen to him with his bloody proposals is simply baffling. He also developed his thought in saying that in the very zone of the conflict, not the Ukrainian one, but in the conflict in the Persian Gulf, he shared that more than 200 Ukrainian experts on combating drones are already in the conflict zone, and with another 3 dozens being prepared to be sent there. On the one hand, they say that they are always lacking something and are always asking to send experts to Ukraine. And on the other hand, they send hundreds of them to the Persian Gulf. We know that they have been sending a lot of the stock cutthroats to the African continent before. Of course, there were no exact precise information, but they were very cheap show elements. He brought with himself a miracle tablet that in real time showed everyone the successes of the AFU in the battlefield. In the parking lot in front of the parliament building, there was an exhibition of Ukrainian drones that Zelensky, you will not believe this, he was trying to sell them to British MPs on £10,000 each. And the British legislators were also did their part, and they received Zelensky not in the parade hall of the House of Commons, but just in one of the rooms, one of the many rooms of the building. And they should know who they're dealing with. But we know how the UK is taking part in this terrorist activity unleashed by the Kiev regime against civilian population. The key result of the visit was the declaration of new bilateral agreements in the framework of the so-called 100-year partnership, oriented to increase the level of interaction up until the level of strategic cooperation. They were talking about the reinforcement of the cooperation area of security and defense and the growth of defense capabilities against modern armaments, and also, I quote, helping global stability based on UK and Ukrainian developments. In response of this in response to this comprehensive military support, Kiev, as paradoxical as it may sound, committed to provide aid in case the UK was attacked. As an example of fruitful cooperation, the UK presented the Octopus project on the creation of interceptor drones, and London also promised to provide £500 million to create an advanced center in the area of AI as part of the Ukrainian MOD. This is a part of UK's course to destabilize our region through broadening military cooperation with the terrorist Kiev regime, and also the attempt to learn the experience of modern war from those who they have long made lab rats in the geopolitical fight against Russia. There was also discussion of the negotiations to settle the Ukrainian conflict. The European hawks are not really interested in the success, of course, and they are ready to obstruct any attempts to reach sustainable agreements on peace. The confirmation of this was another terrorist attack of the AFU committed on March 17th and 19th against infrastructure of the Turk Stream and Blue Stream. The corresponding commentary was given by us on March 20th. We also heard plans of the UK, Netherlands and Finland to launch a new mechanism intended to grow arms supplies and munition supplies and military equipment supplies for the requirements of the Kiev regime by 2027. That's the peace-loving and peace-seeking exchange of opinions. We saw just an aggressive discussion intended to protract the conflict. Against this backdrop, we cannot but mention the results of the European Council session. This extortion for Western aid is actually an arduous process for Zelensky. On the 19th of March, there was a meeting of the European Council, in the aftermath of which the heads of the European institutions, Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa, couldn't ensure the consensus of EU member states to provide the so-called military loan to Kiev amounting to 19 billion euros. They are declaring nevertheless, they are still declaring their commitment to this bankrupt line of support to support the Kiev regime as long as it takes. The outcome statement of the summit that was rejected by two countries, namely Hungary and Slovakia, is rich with propaganda and anti-Russian narratives. There is another mention of the known European position in regards to the settlement of the conflict. Russia is called to agree immediately for a full, unconditional and immediate ceasefire. And I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago how the UK, during their meetings with Zelensky in London, has discussed the growth of aggressive acts and more arms shipments and joint production of munitions and armaments. How is it all linked with the declared comprehensive peace negotiations they're demanding from us? It's unclear. At the same time, they confirmed that they are ready to contribute to ensuring the strong and reliable security safeguards for Kiev, especially in the framework of the so-called coalition of the willing. Any other type of peace, perhaps one that would take into consideration the interests of Russia, the rights, the legal rights and legitimate rights of Russian-speaking citizens of Ukraine, territorial realities, and the rights of people for self-determination, is, of course, not meeting any agreement on the part of Brussels. They want to continue these use neocolonial traditions to exploit Ukraine and to try to use them against Russia in the aggressive purposes. Now on the financial commitments of the European Union, against the backdrop of those trends that are called recession in the world economy, the European Union has nevertheless something to propose to the Kiev regime. On the 4th of March, we witnessed the things that the financial investments into the corrupt Kiev regime are begging more and more questions all around the world. On the 4th of March, as I mentioned, the coalition of the Basque left-wing nationalist forces called Bildu, against the backdrop of the promised 1 billion euro promised to be provided by the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez in 2026. This group asked to provide information on the investigations into the cases of the detection of some armaments sent by NATO to Ukraine, finding them in possession of being possessed by transnational organized crime groups active in Spain. So this begs the question where this multi-billion aid is going into, especially the multi-billion aid provided by Spain. Where are all those arms going that are being sent to the Kiev regime and then re-emerging in the very states that sent them? Nevertheless, they are continuing to fight it. In the 17th of March, the New York Post, citing the reports of the Office of the Inspector General with the long-closed U.S. aid, mentioned the violations they've detected while implementing programs of assistance to Kiev. We're talking about $26 billion sent to support the budget of the country, and some of these funds were sent to the persons already living abroad. At the same time, they've detected a problem of double payments. According to the Deputy Inspector General of the organization, Adam Kaplan, Ukraine didn't provide any necessary reports regarding those payments or didn't do this in time. So, in practice, this shows the corruption of the Bankovaya Street, and they are still somehow being surprised that the Kiev regime did not provide necessary reports in time, that they should have been obliged to do so. So it's their headache now in the West to monitor those reports. The volume of financial support provided to the Kiev regime since 2022 has exceeded the yearly assignations to the countries of Africa threefold. For example, the IMF has presupposed to provide $23.7 billion to Ukraine. This is 877%, and I checked this number many times, 877% of the country quota, which usually for Ukraine was just $2.7 billion a year. From February 2022 to January this year, a total of $65.7 billion were given to Ukraine, for the majority of cases at the expense of guarantees and grants for the Western countries. Just look at, for example, how much money the Western financial institutions are investing into development of countries of Africa. In 2025, they've been IMF loans approved for a total amount of $15.1 billion, including the fact that 13 countries of Africa south of Sahara with the least amount of revenues, only $9.1 billion were provided to the entirety of those countries. That's the mathematics that we are witnessing. These funds sent to the African continent is being provided to the areas where they are needed, into education, and to food, etc. And when this money is provided to the Kiev regime, the intent behind that is murder. They are used for massacres and slaughter, for catching of people, for complete self-imposed cannibalism of the Kiev regime.
On March 22nd, what kind of date is that? Today, I would like to talk about this date, especially and separately, several times. You'll understand why. On March 22nd marked the 80 years of the terrible tragedy in the Belarus village of Khatyn that was totally destroyed together with its residents. Back then, 149 people were killed back then. Do you know how many children were there? They were the children that were under 16. There were 75 of them. how they were killed. In this case, it is important. It is not a separate incident. It is not a disaster. It was not simply hostilities. The village of 27 houses was looted and burned down by the Punishers from the Battalion 118, Schutzmannschaft. It is a security police, and by SS soldiers from the Divelwanger Battalion, under the command of SS Sturmbannführer Erich Kernen. This unit participated in the extermination of Jews in Babi Yar, and in late 1942 it was redeployed to Belarus to fight partisans. Organizers and the perpetrators of the crime included not only Hitlerovists but also Ukrainian nationalists from the western regions of the Ukrainian Soviet Republic. The Battalion 118 was formed in the spring of 1942 in Kiev from the especially trained in Germany members of the Bukovina Kuren. Zelensky, of course, continued to keep silence about the collaborationists of Ukrainian Banderovits. It is of no surprise. Remember how many times Zelensky took photos together with Ukrainian fighters, militants, on the background of the symbols of German nationalist divisions. So how can you remember what happened in Khatyn? Today, Ukraine openly glorify the successes of those who burned down Khatyn, the memorials to Stepan Bandera, Roman Shухevich, Andrei Melnik, and other Nazi accomplices who served in Battalion 118 exist in many towns. Streets, stadiums, other facilities are called in their honor. At the same time, they distort severely and rewrite history and continue attempts to wipe away the mentions about the true heroes who helped the world get rid of the brown plague. The recent examples. In March this year, in Kharkov, Neo-Banderovits took down the memorial plate in honor of the hero of the Soviet Union, Nikolai Titov. Under his command, the Guard Infantry Regiment 12 on July 14, 1944, crossed the river Naman, not far from the village of Merich. In Kharkov, again, the so-called decommunizators took down a memorial plate from a building, from a house where the hero of the Soviet Union lived, the Captain Trofim Pancheshny. He distinguished himself in 1943 during the crossing of Dnieper. Khatyn is a warning about what Nazism can lead to. When successes of Bandera again terrorize the Russian land, we cannot let the brown plague of Nazism to be spread again. It is necessary to so that justice catches up with everyone who follows this path of executions of Khatyn. We'll talk about this topic later on again. On March the 20th in Kiev, the self-proclaimed Kiev Patriarch Filaret died on the 90 years. At the age of 98 years, he was known as an overzealous, power-seeking religious figure who, for his own ambitions, contributed to the establishment and deepening, to emergence and deepening of schism of the Orthodoxy in Ukraine. Filaret was at the different stages of the church hierarchy, was a permanent member of the Holy Synod of Russian Orthodox Church, Exarch of Ukraine, acting patriarch. In June 1990, he was one of the three candidates at the elections of the new patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, but gained the least number of votes. In October 1990, the Bishops' Council of the Russian Orthodox Church turned the Ukrainian Exarchate into a Ukrainian Orthodox Church, granting it independence in management with the blessing of the new Patriarch Alexis II, Filaret became the head of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in the status of Metropolitan of Kiev and all Ukraine. However, he wanted more. In 1991, on his behest, the Bishops' Council of Ukrainian Orthodox Church declared full independence and asked the Russian Orthodox Church for canonic autocephaly. In the spring of 1992, this address was considered by the Bishops' Council of the Russian Orthodox Church, that was attended by the Ukrainian priest as well. However, the church hierarchs opposed the independence. For the schismatic activities, the Bishops' Council of the Russian Orthodox Church stripped Filaret of all holy orders and all the rights associated with the presence in the clergy." End of quote. But he did not back off and established so-called Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kiev Patriarchate. And in 1995, he headed it, he became the so-called head, and declared himself as the Patriarch of Kiev and all Ukrainian Russia. In 1997, the Russian Orthodox Church completely excommunicated Filaret and anathemized him. This decision was made by other local Orthodox churches as well, including in Constantinople. However, Filaret continued to call himself no more or less a patriarch and kept some parishes. He attempted to participate in the political life, supported the so-called European Maidan, and the war started by the regime in Kiev to exterminate Russian and Russian-speaking people in Donbass. In 2018, he participated in the establishment of the so-called Orthodox Church of Ukraine, based on the merger of Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kiev Patriarchate and self-proclaimed Ukrainian Autocephalian Orthodox Church, in hope to become the head of the new national church of the country and to be recognized in his new capacity in the Orthodox Church. The structure was headed by the Metropolitan Epiphanius Demenko, however. And Filaret was declared, I quote, spiritual mentor, end of quote, and he received it in a hostile way. Later, he left the Orthodox Church of Ukraine together with assets and property of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kiev Patriarchate. The loss of this property was very sensitive for the sect of Epiphanius. That is why, as soon as the news spread about the death of Filaret, the schismatics hurried to steal the body to give the last honors to his spiritual mentor, as they say, and to declare their claims on the property of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kiev Patriarchate. They ignored the last will of the deceased. But here's the most terrible thing. The outcome of these experiments with the believers, with the religion, when people think not based on the truth, they do not bow to the real faith, but they attempt to erect a podium for themselves, forgetting about the most important things. The schismatics ignored the last will of the deceased. Can you imagine that? And called his will questionable and forged. And the will, however, the so-called patriarch banned to perform the so-called priest of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine to perform a funeral service on him. This shows in the very best way what's going on in Ukraine. Or I'd rather say disorder and immorality. Rotten to the core, Kiev regime and Banderovits, nurtured by it in robes, act like Stalinists, absolutely forgetting about the basic norms of human morality and consciousness. I'm not even talking about a legal dimension here. All these facts and other facts that I will mention later on confirm the relevance of the goals to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine to remove threats coming from its territory. These goals will be achieved, as the Russian authorities always said. But let's go back to Khatyn. In 1943, the village of Khatyn was exterminated, together with all its residents. I'll remind you, 149 people were killed. They were burned down. 75 of them were children. I know this story very well. I went to Khatyn a year and a half ago. I knew the story from the textbooks, materials from the internet, and wanted to go there. I did that. I came there with my family in order to see with my own eyes these places and to bow to them. That's why I don't have to retell the story for me or for my family, the story of those developments and events, but I'll do that anyway. Our colleagues, so that our colleagues in our countries understand what is going on and what we're talking about, and so that our young generations understand what Western Ukrainian collaboration is, how it mutated, and what it is made of, how it is nurtured. Back then, in 1943, on March 22nd, the residents of the village of Khatyn were chased out to the barn on the outskirts, covered it with straw, doused with petrol, and set on fire. The wooden shack caught fire instantly. Children cried and were suffocating in smoke. The adults attempted to save them in despair. From the pressure of dozens of people, the doors broke down. People in terror, in their clothes on fire, attempted to run away. Those who managed to escape the Nazis shot down with cold blood. As usual, in the Union Republic of Belarus, people remember the residents of all villages of Belarus killed by the German invaders and their accomplices during the Great Patriotic War. There's also very powerful and tragic words there, aside the cemetery of villages. It contains the graves to the villages that burned down as well. There are more than 200 of them, and this list goes on and is updated constantly. Every region, every district of Belarus has the sisters of Khatyn, the villages destroyed by the Hitlerite invaders during the war. The memory of them is perpetuated in the monuments throughout the country. The main memorial site of the all-nation grief is the Khatyn Memorial Complex. It was erected on the place of the destroyed village, and this is a great and very powerful memorial. The decision to establish it was made in 1966. The memorial has several parts, but has one composition structure that repeats the plan of the Khatyn that was burned down. In the center, there's a bronze sculpture, the Invincible Man. He rose alive from the fire, took the body of a dead boy from the flames, and is carrying him through the years, cursing Nazism. His The prototype of him was the witness of the tragedy in Khatyn, Joseph Kaminsky. He survived miraculously, but he was not the only one who became the prototype. A boy also is the prototype. All his family died there. All the years after this tragedy, this witness, Joseph Kaminsky, came there. And even before the memorial complex was established there and there was grass, he tended the place. All his family was killed there. All his neighbors, friends were killed there on that very land. They became the part of that land. And every year, Joseph Kaminsky came and tended the place. The former street of the village is paved with reinforced concrete slabs. Where there were houses, there are 27 symbolic concrete black houses with obelisks resembling chimneys. The obelisks are crowned with bells that chime every 30 seconds. The complex has a unique, the only one in the world, cemetery of villages. It has 185 symbolic graves, but there will be more, unfortunately, because there were more of them. Every one of all these symbolic villages reminds us about the Belarusian villages that were burned down during the Great Patriotic War. The list of the settlements that share the tragic fate of Khatyn is updated. For now, some time ago there were 285 of them, and now there are 290 of them. On March 19, 2026, the memorial complex opened a photo documentary exhibition, The Forger Gave Us the Joy to Live. It is dedicated to the witnesses of the tragedy in Khatyn, the people whose fate is forever tied with this symbol of national memory and pain. The visitors can see unique materials from personal archives of the people in Khatyn. It is the living history of the guardians of the memory of the village that was destroyed. The number of visitors coming there is only growing. In 2026, more than 32,000 people visited it. It is 110,000 more compared to the previous year. On March 22nd, the leadership of all state bodies of the Republic of Belarus came to commemorate the memory of those severely killed by the Nazi punishers in the village of Khatyn. Together with the Foreign Minister of Belarus, representatives of the diplomatic corps accredited in the Republic also laid flowers to the eternal flame. I would like to say yet again that the tragedy in Khatyn is not a separate incident in the war. It is one of many thousands of facts that show a purposeful policy of genocide by the Hitlerite Germany against the multinational Soviet people. Especially violent mass extermination of civilians on the occupied territories was a part of the strategy of the Nazi Germany. These military crimes was actively and voluntarily, I'll underline that, voluntarily participated the collaborationists. They were the Ukrainian and the Baltic nationalists were especially brutal. Almost all participants of the massacre in Khatyn, including the Punishers from Battalion 118, were brought to justice. The last one to be brought to justice was the head of staff of this battalion, Grigory Vasura, in 1986 in Minsk. He was found guilty by the decision of the military tribunal and sentenced to death. But it is symptomatic that those who managed to hide in the western part of the occupied Germany They managed to avoid justice. They included commander of the Battalion 118, Konstantin Smovsky, as well as another of other punishers. All of them lived, of course, in the US, Canada. It is easy to guess. Looking back, it becomes clearer that the society should know more about the atrocities committed by the traitors, including with the participation of the Ukrainian collaborationists in the burn down of Khatyn. It's quite likely that in this case the ideological successors could not start perennial genocide in Donbass and burn down of civilians in the House of Trade Unions in Odessa on May 2nd, 2014. It's no coincidence that this crime is called the Second Khatyn. Let grief and sadness turn into courage and strength. This is the instruction to the future generations. It is stamped on the wreath of memory, the collective grave in Khatyn. We won't betray this memory. March 22nd. I told you we were going to talk about it. It is not only Khatyn and this tragedy.
But the 22nd of March 2024, it's the tragedy in our country. The tragedy of modern period in our country. Russia suffered one of the most cynical, inhumane and bloody terrorist attacks committed on its territory. On that day, the terrorists, armed with automatic weapons, opened fire just some minutes before the start of the concert in the concert hall building that they subsequently set on fire, preventing those inside from leaving. Then the terrorists moved towards the Russian-Ukrainian border and were detained there. As a result of the terrorist attack, people were killed. I understand that it's impossible just to draw such parallels, but life, it does that. 149 people died. In Khatyn on the 22nd of March, 149 people died. Among the killed, the Russian Foreign Ministry employee, first-class specialist of the Department of Linguistic Support, Tatiana Repina, she was among the killed, and more than 600 people suffered injuries. Of course, our sorrow is with the families and friends of those who were affected by this horrible crime. Russian competent authorities have established the circumstances of the preparation of the terrorist attack. They have detained the accomplices. All of them appeared in court that delivered its verdict on the 12th of March this year. 11 accomplices were sentenced to life imprisonment. Another received 22 years imprisonment and 6 months, and 3 received 9 years and 11 months. The purpose was destabilization of political situation in our country. It confirms the terrorist nature of the Kiev regime, for which such methods have long become normal. Just look at the immoral action on the anniversary of this tragedy in the concert hall. This hellish flash mob launched by one of restaurants in Ukraine. The visitors are offered. Just have courage to listen to that all, because we must tell the international audience about what is now happening in Ukraine. So the visitors, on the day of the anniversary of the tragedy, at the Ukrainian restaurant, they were offered to mark this incredibly funny event, and those who ordered a set of hors d'oeuvre that was called Crocus City. They were offered 4 glasses, small glasses. But you know why 4? Because it's the number of terrorists. So this PR campaign was qualified as a way of celebration of this murder. It's not some part of a horror film. It's not some prohibited part of a telephone video of someone who is sick, who is a maniac. It's in the center of this state that gets multi-billion aid in weapons and money. At the restaurant, they offer a menu to honor those who have killed tens and tens of civilians. Yes, it's just difficult to qualify that in words. It's just not evil acts, it's just sickness. And a crime, of course, because it does not fit into the moral norms and humanity. It's just inhumane. It's just beastly actions. And such ideas, they could appear only, yes, any ideas could appear in different heads and different communities. It's the issue of relationship of society to that, the relationship within the state. So such ideas, they bloom completely without any condemnation, only where hatred and inhumane Nazi ideology thrive. It's not against some specific person, it's just the situation, hatred, in general, is a condition of a soul. It's not just cynical mockery of the memory of the killed. It's just glorification of terrorists and their methods in the context of the sad anniversary of the events at Crocus City Hall and the sentencing of the perpetrators and accomplices of this terrorist attack. We know that the threats posed by international terrorist and extremist organizations, primarily ISIL, Al-Qaeda and associated groups, continue to escalate and to evolve. Risks grow of weapons and munitions subsequently spreading to neighboring regions. From Ukraine, Russia consistently advocates strengthening the UN Central coordinating role and building the established international legal framework, abandoning double standards and hidden agendas, and not allowing the use of those problems, as well as terrorist groups themselves, as a tool of geopolitics and interference in international affairs. Our country supports the strengthening of counter-terrorism cooperation with all constructively minded states, including within the dynamically multilateral developing forums as the CSTO, CIS, BRICS, and SCO. The surge in terrorism worldwide in recent years is largely provoked by Western interference in the international internal affairs of sovereign states, primarily Iraq, Libya, Syria, and Afghanistan. It's about the Westerners politicizing the counter-terrorism agenda, using double standards. They do not consider terrorism an absolute evil and do not adhere to a zero-tolerance policy towards it. For them, it's a tool for pursuing neo-colonial policy, pressuring sovereign states and ensuring their own dominance. Russia finds it unacceptable, and we will continue to fight this evil with all the available means. In Ukraine, we are witnessing Westerners deploying terrorists and extremists to achieve their own geopolitical objectives. Nurtured by their Euro-Atlantic curators, the terrorists just commit their crimes, destroying civilian infrastructure and killing civilians. The Kiev regime employs terrorist methods itself and cooperates with international terrorist groups, also for fighting against legitimate governments, particularly, as I have already mentioned today, in Africa, on the African continent. Ukraine has been turned into a true logistical hub from where Western weapons are distributed throughout the world, falling into the hands of both criminals and terrorists. And what is now happening in Ukraine? On the 27th of March, the report will be presented Dr. Mengeles of the Kiev regime at the Russia Сегодня press center. The Kiev regime is just doing its best to copy its idols from the Third Reich. The report has been prepared by the International Public Tribunal under the chairmanship of Maxim Grigoriev. It's yet another confirmation of this vicious practice. I would remind you that the name of Dr. Joseph Mengeles has become a common word for inhumane experiments. He conducted them on prisoners in concentration camps in Nazi Germany. And after the Nuremberg Tribunal, it has become a synonym for sadism, cruelty, inhumane treatment of prisoners, and a complete disregard for medical ethics, as well as basic principles of humanism and morality. By the most modest estimates, his victims number in tens of thousands. It would seem that such inhumane crimes would have been left in the last century, along with all the horrors perpetrated by the Nazis and their collaborators. But the testimonies from prisoners, they testify to the contrary. The Nazi essence of the Kiev regime is just actively demonstrated love for the symbols of the Third Reich and also the inhumane treatment of the wounded. The details recounted by Russian servicemen who returned from capacity are capable of horrifying even the most hardened cynics. For the second time today, I would ask you to be courageous to hear all that. For those people who are not prepared, it will not be simple. I mean amputation without anesthesia, deliberately inflicting pain by inserting medical instruments into wounds, using prisoners for training exercise for medical students, striking broken bones. It has become a routine, unfortunately, for many Ukrainian doctors. I do not know to what extent this word is applicable here, but those medical workers, they have clearly forgotten the Hippocratic oath. They just exchanged it to the Joseph Mengele oath. All the facts presented in this report are not just some accidental cases. It's not just one-off case. It's a manifestation of inhumane, endless, sadistic tendencies, not of a single doctor, but it's systemic phenomenon now. Obviously, it's not about single cases, some specific persons. No. It has become a pandemic for doctors in Ukraine who are allowed to treat prisoners of war. It's a systemic phenomenon, I would repeat. And it's being supported at such a level, in such a format, by the Kiev regime. They are aware about that. And they consider it an absolute norm and do nothing about that. But not all doctors in Ukraine just are ready to ignore the norms of humanity, but of course not. But the number of those who participated in this sadistic bacchanal, it's just shocking. And doctors mentioned that they were prohibited from giving painkillers to prisoners of war. According to the Geneva Convention on Bankova, have they not heard about such a document? The treatment of prisoners of war, it should always... I don't know how to put it. It sounds banal. Everyone is aware of that, remembered, and many generations, they know that, they have known that prisoners of war should be treated humanely. Any unlawful act resulting in the death of a prisoner of war in the custody of a country or seriously endangering a prisoner's health, they are prohibited and must be considered as a grave breach of the Convention. No physical or mental torture or other coercive measures may be applied to prisoners of war. But atrocities against Russian prisoners of war constitute war crimes that have no statute of limitations. So everyone will be responsible for that. Ukrainian leaders, heads of Ukrainian medical institutions who gave criminal orders to those doctors who carried out those crimes. On the 27th of March, it will be MGIMO diplomas presented to veterans of the special military operations who participated in the program of additional training, urban infrastructure and territorial development manager. Sergey Lavrov will preside this ceremony, and among the honored guests will be the State Secretary and Deputy Minister of Defense Anna Tsivilova, MGIMO Rector Anatoly Torkonov, Head of the Main Directorate of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Khatyn, and heads of the regions will be attending. Those who have sent students to that program. The 2-month training took place at MGIMO's Odintsova branch. 29 veterans participated from St. Petersburg, Vladimir, Kaluga, Leningrad, Lipetsk, Moscow, Nizhny Novgorod, Novgorod, Orel, Pskov, Ryazan, Smolensk, Tver, Tula, and Yaroslavl regions. It was not only for Korean military personnel, but civilian professions, economists, engineers, medical workers, and many other professionals. This program, at the request of Sergey Lavrov, includes 7 training modules, independent project work, practical training at infrastructure facilities in Moscow and Moscow region. Today, it's a major in-person program for special military operation veterans, and in the current conditions when high demands are before the state civil servants, it's the combat experience and psychological fortitude of patriotism will be in demand in regional and municipal governments. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and its subordinate institutions will continue to contribute to the implementation of Vladimir Putin's directive to train highly qualified managers from among the special military operations veterans. And they will continue to serve their fatherland in a new field.
Now another topic, situation in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf. We have a lot of questions received, and we try to answer them as time goes. We have seen the questions from Kommersant, Izvestia, Al-Mayadin, Possolskaya Жизнь, and other additions regarding the situation in the Middle East and different speculations in regards to the US-Iran negotiation process and the further escalation of the conflict and possible mediatory efforts to restore peace to the region. Since there have been a lot of questions with a common topic, we prepared a complex response. A new stage of U.S.-Israeli aggression has started against the backdrop of negotiations between the sides. Tehran has accomplished and has been accomplishing their part of work in good faith, and it turned out that Washington used this as cover-up for the start of the war, and this is discreditation of diplomacy. It's obvious now that the conflict is developing not according to the initial blueprint, and perhaps there's another call for negotiations is intended to create more fruitful environment for the continuation of the strikes. Our principal position has not changed. We think that negotiations are the only reason, on the only resolution to end the crisis, which has involved not only the Middle East but the entire world. The crisis, which has a tendency to, unfortunately, woefully, to be spread along geographical frontiers and nuclear catastrophe, caused Russia to call on a swift end to violence and sustainable dialogue to reach sustainable peace in the region. We are intrinsically ready to support it. Regarding the fate of the nuclear material amassed by Iran, the NPT, not that the NPT nor the agreement with the IAEA do not, and I once again underline the fact that they do not set any limits to the amount of nuclear material in possession of non-nuclear states that they are manufacturing, and there are no limits in regards to the enrichment process as long as this process is controlled by the IAEA. So only voluntary measures on the part of Tehran are possible without any infringement upon the sovereign rights of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Only Iran has the right to dispose of their nuclear material as they see fit. Another aspect of a topic that we regularly commenting about, and we're providing speedy replies to the questions. Our representative and ambassadors and permanent representatives at the international organizations make statements in that regard, provide evaluation of the unfortunately only growing crisis that we're witnessing before our eyes. I will not repeat myself, but in one aspect I would like to have some addition. During the strikes of March strikes of the U.S. against Iran, many UNESCO sites included in the list of World Heritage sites have been damaged, including the Palace of Golestan in Tehran and the Mechet Jame, Palace of Chehil Sotun, and the components of the Meydan Imam Square. On the 2nd of March, the Internet portal of UNESCO published the statement condemning the destruction in Iran without mentioning any initiators or participants of the conflict, and calling on all sides, very interestingly, to abide by the UN Convention on the Preservation of the World Cultural and Natural Heritage of 1972 and the Hague Convention on Protection of Cultural Valuables in Case of Armed Conflict of 1954. On March 11th, the director of the Center of World Heritage of UNESCO, Lazar Elunzo Asomo, and the press secretary of the Organization on the Issues of Culture and Priority Africa, Monia Givano, have made a statement against this damage to the cultural heritage of the entirety of the Middle East and Iran. The American-Israeli aggression against Iran already led multiple fatalities and a lot of suffering. Children are dying. The healthcare system is suffering. Thousands of people have been left without shelter and were forced to leave their homes. The region is threatened by the a very real environmental catastrophe. Against the backdrop of those tragedies, we shouldn't forget about the real danger of destruction of our worldwide heritage, our cultural heritage. Everything that forms us as a civilization is cultural and historical diversity and is a material manifestation of the history of mankind. On December 29, 1947, back in 1947, while making a statement during the opening of the Rerich paintings exhibition, first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, mentioned that the Russian painter and thinker tried, even before the start of Second World War, tried to initiate a multilateral multilateral covenant to protect cultural valuables. But as he himself admitted, Mr. Nehru, he said that such agreements are quickly forgotten during wars. We have relevant conventions right now, not the multilateral documents. However, as the events in Iran show, a threat to lose the unique masterpieces of the past forever has not gone anywhere. Due to the protracted conflict in the Persian Gulf region, there is still a risk of destruction of the most ancient edifices that we have inherited from the past generations, and it's our duty to preserve them for posterity, for our children and grandchildren to have the opportunity to touch the cultural heritage, so that no one would be able to tell them that their history doesn't exist. And it's our duty to preserve this heritage. On our side, we will continue to monitor the developments with the situation of the cultural historical sites in Iran on the relevant international platforms. I will especially underline something for those that people are killed, and you are talking about monuments. Every day we are making corresponding statements condemning the civilian casualties. We already made a statement today about a blatant murder, massacre, unprovoked aggression against children, women, and peaceful civilian population. In this case, the civilian suffering is has our undivided attention. We need to use every opportunity to stop this monstrous bloodshed. But it's important to look at all the aspects of this tragedy, especially to have the whole mindlessness and inadmissibility of the situation. Today we talk about the history of those times of the Second World War and the Great Patriotic War, and I am convinced that some will say that perhaps you should be commenting on the relevant news. You are commenting news, but why do you have so much history in your reports? I will prove to you that there can be too much history, and I will explain why it is so important to know your history. It's important to know it because on the 16th of March in Riga, in the very center of the city, there was a traditional. What do you think? What do you think happened as per tradition? Not the spring festival, not a flower festival. There was a march of former legionaries of Waffen-SS and their fans from the number of the representatives of the local nationalist radical organizations. And among the participants of this congregation, there have been high-ranking Latvian officials, deputies of the same, representative of the mayor's office and the local government from among the right-wing radical parties, from the same people that love to criticize our country. And just look at how it all turns out. They are ready to accuse the other, but they don't notice their own faults. We see this event intended to glorify former SS members as direct abuse of memory of those who have lost their lives trying to save the Mir from the Brown Plague. The heroes, in quote-unquote, that they have glorified have taken part directly in the murder of Jewish people in the territory of the Latvian SSR and also conducted punitive operations in the territories of the Russian SSR, the Belarus SSR, and Poland, without discrimination and not even pitying children, women, or the elderly. Once again, the Latvian authorities are appeasing this situation, and they are trying to put an equation sign between those who attacked and destroyed and those who were attacked, and nevertheless tried to liberate their own land and the entirety of the world. I'd like to point out once again that evidence of the spread of Nazi ideas in the Baltic states with the support of the authorities have been highlighted in the MFA reports 80 years after the Great Victory. The shadow of Nazism has covered Europe once again, and on the situation in some countries of Europe surrounding the destruction and desecration of memorials erected for those who fought Nazism in the years of the Second World War, that have been published and on our website. And also this topic was mentioned in the regular reports of the MFA, such as on the situation with the glorification of Nazism, spread of neo-Nazism, and other practices serving to escalate the modern form of racism and racial discrimination, xenophobia, and other forms of intolerance. We condemn the continued neo-fascist bacchanalia in the Baltic region. Fascism didn't end in 1945, and it met an end in 1945, and now there is no future for any of its adherents. Any attempts to rewrite history and to glorify Nazi collaborators are cynical and inadmissible. Our country is defending the truth about the Second World War, and we are decisively preventing any attempts to rehabilitate Nazism, no matter where they are undertaking. Today, those who are still marching under those banners should remember that retaliation is inevitable, and all the patrons of such manifestations are leading them into a political and moral abyss. And in the neighboring Baltic state, we saw the similar practice, perhaps not a costume party this time, but doing something close to that in the modern sense of the word. Now, a couple of words about the surprising and its stupidity initiative of the Lithuanian, this time, authorities to ban entry to Lithuania to those performers that have been performing in Russia and Belarus since February 24th, 2022, for a term of up to 5 years. Once again, this confirms the commitment of the Lithuanian authorities to an uncompromised Russophobic stance and the maniacal desire of local elites to block any opportunities for their own citizens to get an alternative information on Russia and its culture. This is just drowning in ignorance that we are witnessing in the Baltic countries, and especially in Lithuania. We are forced to state that the anti-Russian hysteria of Vilnius is taking more and more ugly shapes. The measures undertaken by local authorities to introduce a sort of a quarantine for Russian culture is now supplemented by bans on those who hasn't joined the Russophobic craze and didn't subject itself to the canceling campaign against our country and everything that is Russian. And perhaps the Lithuanians thought that Russian culture would be quickly banned and cancelled in the West, and Russian history would be banned and cancelled, and that would become an around the world phenomena. But this doesn't come to pass. Either they decided to do this themselves, or they received a corresponding order to do something locally. Such conduct by Lithuanian authorities are testament to their fear and mistrust towards their own compatriots. Perhaps they are really fearing that watching Russian performers and that are continuing to seep through the obstructions raised by Vilnius would raise a threat from the east and will nullify the efforts of all local Russophobes to cancel and demolish the remnants of Russian culture. You shouldn't fear that, because this will happen anyway. This will all happen anyway. And the coming generations of the Baltic states will, in one way or another, find out which deplorable role was played by the preceding regime in their countries, implementing the worst possible practices inherited from Nazism, racism, and other different types of xenophobia. There are other examples how you can preserve your own culture and nevertheless develop cultural diversity, equally paying attention to the linguistic diversity of the population, of the majority or the minority, the indigenous people's languages, how one can respectfully develop this coexistence of different cultures and the people that are talking in different language, speaking different languages, and do this harmoniously for the benefit of all current and future generations. There have been a lot of questions in regards of what is being done in our country to preserve the language heritage of the indigenous peoples of the Russian Federation. We prepared an answer, and I think that this is a good counterexample of how other countries and Western countries, while they are conducting these cancel campaigns, erasure of identities, and we are doing the other thing. As you know, the UN has declared the decade of 2022-2032 an international decade of the indigenous people's languages. One of the priorities of the national plan of events on conducting this decade is the digitalization of the language and cultural heritage of national minorities and indigenous peoples. In the context of the efforts taken to preserve the languages of the peoples of the Russian ethnicities of the Russian Federation, the House of the Russian Peoples is ensuring the creation of the corpus of mother tongues, that is, parallel text in different languages, to be included into the Yandex Translate service. Currently, 18 languages have been included into that service, and the neural network technology to synthesize and detect this language is being developed for the Bashkir, Mari, and Chuvash languages. Also, the Russian online encyclopedia RuWiki is being also supported in the languages. For example, 20 languages of Russia that have 1.5 million articles written in each of them. Also, we are working on the creation of an international portal on the indigenous languages. The digitalization of the languages of indigenous people is facing different difficulties related to the technical aspects, financial aspects, and legal and social character. It's one of the difficulties linked to the fact that the Unicode does not include around 40 symbols that are being used in the languages of the peoples of the Russian Federation. In this, the Russian company Paratype created different types and typefaces for the extended Cyrillic script for more than 150 languages and dialects, including the indigenous peoples' languages of the indigenous peoples of Russia. Also, there are new projects being implemented on development of the language diversity in support of indigenous peoples of Russia in the national internet domain zone.rf. Since August 2025, the .rf domain has been supplemented by the capability of registering the use of of websites with the use of 26 additional Cyrillic characters, being part of 18 state languages of the entities of Russian Federation, the languages of Adygea, Abazin, the Altaic, Bashkir, Buryat, Ingush, Kabardin and Cherkess, Kalmyk, Komi, Mari, Tatar, Tuvan, and Udmurt, Hakas, Chechen, Chuvash, Ossetin, and Yakut, and other languages. The key is to provide them full-fledged access to the internet resources on their mother languages.
Now, about pushing out of those unwanted alternative, call them as you may, and I would call them free journalists from the Western media space. Yet again, we have to draw your attention to the continued practice of putting pressure on the Russian journalists. Now we're talking about the actions of the EU that cannot be called anything but political impunity. This time, the Austrian authorities distinguished themselves. They initiated the procedure to revoke accreditation from the TASS bureau head in Vienna, Maxim Cherevik, with consequent effect to pushing him out of this country. As we learned, the journalist received the notification from the agency of the Federal Chancellor of Austria in charge of the work with foreign journalists, among other things. The document reads the cancellation of his journalist accreditation with a requirement to return the irrelevant press card. The basis for the procedure is claimed to be the results of some routine security check ostensibly conducted after the Russian journalists applied to participate in the 32nd session of OSCE, Council of Foreign Ministers in Vienna on December 4th through 5th, 2025. We noted the fact that the wording of this notification also word by word copies the similar notifications received in 2024, the TASS journalists Irina Davidian and Ivan Popov. Back then, it resulted in the official refusal by Austria to extend their resident permits and their consequent expulsion from the country. This operation, the Austrians conducted despite the existing press accreditation of Russian correspondents at the UN office in Vienna. At the same time, we see awkward attempts of the Austrian side to present it as the consequences of some technical procedures and checks. This shows, at the very least, cynical. How many times should we send you journalists to Vienna? Once a year? What is the time frame here? Let's call a spade a spade. De facto, we're talking about a targeted expulsion of a particular journalist for his professional activities. We see these actions as conscious and politically motivated pressure on the Russian media, as well as the serious violation of the international obligations of Austria, including within the OSCE, to ensure freedom of expression and indiscriminatory access to information. This practice is nothing more than the cleansing of the information space from alternative points of view that is conducted via political censorship. The Austrian authorities should realize their responsibility for the degradation for the situation in the freedom of media and draw relevant conclusions. It's Austria that expels Russian journalists, persecutes them, impedes their work systemically, and doing the same things time and time again. And Russia reserves the right to respond to this if they don't change their behavior. An important work was conducted by the Union of Journalists of Russia about the research that they conducted. You know that during our briefings and in a larger diplomatic work, we regularly talk about unjust, dishonest, and politically biased approach of various international human rights structure to respond to the facts of crimes of international humanitarian law, including when it comes to attacks and terror attacks against Russian journalists and other media employees. In this context, this report that was prepared by the Union of Journalists of Russia shows the selectiveness in registering the violent deaths of journalists that is seen in a set of seemingly authoritative international structures. This work, detailed work, was conducted by the Union of Journalists. They started the publicly available materials of the International NPO Committee to Protect Journalists. They analyzed these materials thoroughly and in an unbiased manner. They looked into the methodology that it used, and they draw a conclusion that in 2025 this method was used asymmetrically in cases of incidents with journalists, depending on what side of the line of conduct they fulfill their professional duty. We will provide the link to this report. We'll use it and translate it into the various languages. We'll spread it among the relevant international platforms and send to all international organizations in charge of ensuring security for media and journalists. We received a lot of questions asking to comment on the exercises at the Korean Peninsula. We witnessed escalation of tensions on the Korean Peninsula in south of the peninsula since March 9th through 19th. The U.S. and the Republic of Korea held regular joint military exercises, freedom of shield. Officially, they were claimed to be of defensive nature. However, judging on the contents of the events that they trained and the use of military equipment, these maneuvers are nothing but open preparation to war. It is clear that such military activity of Washington and Seoul don't contribute to reduction of tensions. This won't help to reframe the situation to the political and diplomatic track of settlement. While the ruling elites in the U.S. and the Republic of Korea seek more military pressure and sanctions on Pyongyang, we won't see any possibility of positive chances on the Korean Peninsula. We are sure that the only total abandonment of aggressive steps and the account of concerns of the North Korea can lead to more security, long-lasting peace in this region. On March 23rd, during the official visit to the Russian Federation of Prime Minister of the Government of Social Republic of Vietnam, Pham Minh Thien, and an intergovernmental agreement on cooperation in building the first nuclear power plant on the territory of Vietnam with the participation of Rosatom State Corporation was signed. The agreement lays a legal framework to implement a large-scale project, including the construction of 2 energy units designed by Russia, the maintenance, supplies of fuel and staff training. Rosatom has all the necessary expertise It has built 41 energy units in 11 countries. The building of the first nuclear power plant will help ensure an energy security of Vietnam and will give a powerful impetus to expanding cooperation in adjacent regions. One more event that took place, I'll tell you briefly. You'll learn more about it from our social networks. We will give more detailed information there on March 24th, the Diplomatic Academy of MGIMO University hosted a scientific and diplomatic symposium marking 250 years since the birthday of an outstanding diplomat and statesman of Russia and Greece, Ioannis Kapodistrias. Welcoming remarks to guests of the conference were sent by Foreign Minister of Russia Sergey Lavrov. The event was participated by Russian and Greek public figures, representatives of the societies of friendship and researchers. During his service in the Russian MFA, as the close ally of Emperor Alexander II, he helped build sustainable international relations on the European continent. Ioannis Kapodistrias promoted the development of Russia-Greece ties. It is symbolic that diplomatic relations were established between the countries on 1828 when he was the governor of the Greek state, but until Greece was fully recognized as independent from the Ottoman Empire. We deem it useful such events to be held. In our on March 29th, we will celebrate 35 years in the establishment of diplomatic relations between Russia and Panama. Our relationships go back quite a lot of time. One of the examples of our good relations is the passage of Soviet submarines from the Pacific Ocean Fleet to protect Arctic convoys of the Allies in 1982. In the memory of this event, in 2025, a monument was erected. It became the first and the only memorial to the Soviet submarine officers in Latin America. We always talked and supported the neutrality of the legal status of the Panama Canal enshrined in the treaty concerning its permanent neutrality and operation of 1977, and protocol to which we understand that ties between Russia and Panama is of huge potential, and we unlock this potential through constructive political dialogue, building up interparliamentary and interagency contacts, expansion of scientific and educational and academic exchanges, cultural and humanitarian cooperation in general. We value Panama as a promising trade and economic partner of Russia with unique geography, develop trade and finance infrastructure. We're convinced that we have new possibilities ahead of us for multidimensional interaction of mutual interests for the good of Russian and Panama peoples. We congratulate our friends from Panama on this wonderful date. There's one more date. We talked about it this year. The main theater of Russia, the State Academic Bolshoi Theatre, celebrates its 250th anniversary. The day of the foundation of the Bolshoi Theatre is March 17, 1776, when the provincial prosecutor Prince Petro Rusev received the permission of Empress Catherine II to keep the theatre performances of any kind as well as concert and masquerade. End of quote. The Bolshoi Theatre contributed significantly to developing international ties through concert tours, implementation of joint projects, organization of educational programs, and the broadcasting of performances. Within its anniversary 250th season, the Bolshoi Theatre for the first time went to Istanbul with a large-scale tour. They are delicately combining traditions and developing new tracks. The theatre represents the Russian art at the leading international platform while still being a center of world's music culture. This year, the list of productions was updated and expanded, both in Russia and had a tour both in Russia and abroad. Now I am prepared to answer your questions. We're quite short of time today. Please, the international affairs. Good afternoon. Here's my question. The General Secretariat said that Zelensky wishes to have a deal in Ukraine. In your opinion, is the statement sincere? Within the context that we have, we regularly inform the U.S. representatives about inadmissibility of providing Kiev with reconnaissance data. We know that armed forces of Ukraine target Russian facilities on the Russian territory, including civilian. I have to say that the response to our demarches, the U.S. side usually keeps silence or just does not provide substantial information. But this is a very relevant issue. Is RIA Novosti with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. We have one question, if I may. What can you say about the outcomes of the EU summit of March 19th in Brussels? If this event caught your eye, on March 19th, the session of the European Council yet again confirmed the anti-Russian approach, but not only the countries themselves, but only the regimes that are established there. The joint statement published following it on behalf of 25 member states are full of EU propaganda and Russian stamps, or memes, if I may say. Instead of looking for possibilities for diplomatic solutions, the aggressive European majority is still focused on building up efforts to support the Kiev regime and to torpedo initiatives, as we saw from this event aimed at peaceful settlement of the conflict. Under the pretexts of the existential threat coming from Russia, the European Council confirmed their wish to increase their defense capabilities by 2030. However, bureaucrats in Brussels keep silence that they do that at the expense of decreasing other budgetary means. First of all, that go for social matters. Probably they think that they can insult in other ways their own people. But this will end up in certain sentiment in their own country. But what will be the way out? Bucha on the European continent. But all their actions will be paid for by the future generations of Europeans. As to the situation in the Persian Gulf, the leaders of the EU managed to agree upon only a statement with a number of critical statements against Iran. On the example of the developments in the Middle East, the inability to act of the EU is not only clear, but it is outrageous. We took note on the call on of the European Council to respect the rights of nations for self-determination and ensuring the freedoms of navigation. That's what they remembered finally. The EU showed their nature. When it came to Greenland, they remembered about the UN Charter in all its interconnectedness and entirety. But when it came to Crimea and other new Russian regions, when they made their own choice within the existing legal framework, this topic was a taboo for the EU. The same applies to the freedom of
and ensuring the passage of their own vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, while simultaneously using force to restrict the movement of vessels carrying cargo in the interests of our country. So that was the topic for the recent European Council as well. Not developing some strategy, no breakthrough decisions adopted, just a lack of goodwill and silliness. And that was their helplessness, their own helplessness, popular statements about unbalancing the energy markets and decreasing energy prices. So what they banned for themselves to buy energy resources from one of the main suppliers, Russia, they did not think about it. They did not think about correcting the European emissions trading systems for greenhouse gases in order to somehow decrease the burden of energy enterprises. So their purpose is economizing energy, but not reasonable. But what is the result of their recklessness, their own recklessness? And the desire of the Europeans to impose their notorious green standards on everyone. It's just double standards. When Brussels is undermining European energy security itself, destroying it, it's just their green agenda. And such measures could have not cosmetic effect, but some illusionary effect. When the energy has been turned into some Achilles heel for the European Union. I do not know how to name it. They are not ready for actions. It has become a really complex situation for them. So, hello, Madam Zakharova, is Vestia here? How can you comment on the Israeli ambassador interview, where he mentioned a unilateral official stance of Russia contrasting with the level of cooperation of our country? So I would be surprised if our position would be bilateral, because our country has its position. It's the position of the country, not a side to the conflict, but a country, where the approach is formed, and it's important to underline that. Yes, I have seen that interview at your media outlet. Yes, it's necessary to underline that the position is based on facts. It's not just Today's situation is a balanced position based on facts, with the understanding of the historical process and with the analysis of what will happen in the future. Yes, we have started the mentioned interview. Yes, of course, the fact is stated that Russia and Israel are linked with friendly relations. Yes, we will not argue that. We value them and we seek to develop them, relations between the leaders of our country. A trusting political dialogue, it is maintained, and we share those assessments, of course. And against this background, the statements by the ambassador allegedly about the unilateral position of Moscow on the situation in the Middle East. As our assessments are well balanced and they are not biased but based on facts and foreign policy analysis, but such public assessments of his hosting country position by the ambassador, it's not about contributing to strengthening friendly ties. Thank you to you. Is Sputnik Japan with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova, good evening. Sputnik Tokyo, Dmitry Gavrilov. I have a question. Recently, Japanese media have reported that Japanese authorities are considering purchasing Ukrainian-made drones to strengthen the country's defense capabilities. How would you comment on this information? Thank you. You know, such reports, especially if they are confirmed, further testify to the fact that Tokyo is increasingly involved in military cooperation with the Kiev regime that is openly demanding weapons for the Ukrainian Armed Forces in exchange for drones. Clearly that is bringing the peaceful resolution even further. And any attempts by the Japanese authorities to establish shipments of weapons, lethal weapons, to the Kiev regime will be considered hostile actions against our country, and the retaliatory measures will follow. Thank you. Is Xinhua with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. Xinhua agency here. Recently, the United States of America has said that the American Armed Forces must control space. It indicates U.S. intentions to deploy weapons in outer space, and China consistently opposes the militarization of space. How do you assess U.S. actions in this area, and does this pose a security threat to international community? Yes, I would like to clarify. Will the United States control, according to those statements, the entire space or some part of it? Yes, it's a rhetorical question. Actually, we have commented in detail this U.S. statement on the 19th of March. They are becoming increasingly aggressive, and officials in Washington openly declare their intention to secure military dominance in near-Earth space. It's a rapidly deteriorating situation in space security, growing threat of space becoming an arena for armed confrontation. We are convinced that any armed conflict in orbit would have catastrophic consequences for the long-term sustainability of space activities and the prospects for space exploration for all states without exception. And at the same time, let us not just make some preliminary statements, but it will depend much on coordinated actions by the international community. Initiative to prevent arms race is very much in demand, and developing legally binding instruments and the Chinese-Russian draft treaty on the prevention of the placement of weapons in outer space and the threat or use of force against outer space objects. It could be a basis for that. We will continue constructive efforts to strengthen space security in close coordination with the People's Republic of China, among others. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Reuters with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova. It's about the connection. Yes, we are here. We have two questions about the freedom of navigation, and I will just ask them one after another. Last Friday, it was reported that the French Navy detained the oil tanker sailing under the Mozambican flag in the Mediterranean Sea. The ship was called Dana. How does the Russian Foreign Ministry assess such actions against merchant shipping? And quite recently, Nikolai Patrushev, in an interview with Kommersant, said that Russia could consider escorting ships, vessels, if additional threats appear posed by European states, could consider additional measures. Could you clarify what are those measures and how are they developed? So let me start replying from the beginning. Recently, we have repeatedly commented on such controversial actions by Western states. On the 23rd of March, we published a detailed and comprehensive statement by the Russian Foreign Ministry in that respect. We think that such actions are unacceptable, impermissible, and gross violation of the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. We will use all the tools we have, legal tools, in order to ensure the respect for the principle of freedom of navigation. And those who intend to transform the Baltic Sea into, in brackets, internal water, a quotation for NATO and the EU, such measures will not go unanswered, and we will use all the available means. So we support the 1982 Convention, resist to neo-colonial dictatorship, and stand for the unification in order to protect the legitimate interests of maritime carriers. So we think it's unacceptable to turn the maritime space into a zone of confrontation, and actually to return to piracy, but at a new technological level. So why has the international community worked so hard on preserving the international regulation? Why have so many resources been spent in order for the maritime space to be regulated, when it's possible like that just to remember about pirates' tricks of 300 years ago, but in new technological harpoons to seize vessels, to rob them and to destroy them, and so on? Yes, that's the case, but we have the film Pirates of the 21st Century, but it's some prophecy. It's symbolic, actually. We thought it's absurd, but it's a new reality. Now about the interview by Nikolai Patrushev. An emphasis was made in that interview on political and diplomatic means widely used by our country to counter illegal actions by EU members. They are not always effective. It's obvious. In that regard, the competent authorities have developed and implement a whole range of appropriate actions. Specifically, measures are being envisaged to escort Russian-flagged vessels, and special measures to install protective equipment on board vessels and other measures, but I will not go into detail here because it's not my scope. But any unfriendly measure will meet with a proportionally strong response. We have the necessary means and capabilities available. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Town News with us? Yes. Hello, Madam Zakharova. Hello. Town News Information Agency, Georgia. First of all, I would like to thank President Putin of the Russian Federation, Russian Orthodox Church, and the people of Russia for honoring the memory of our beloved Patriarch Ilya II, and the participation of Special Representative of the President of the Russian Federation for International Cultural Cooperation, Mikhail Shvydkoy, in the farewell ceremony for Catholicos Patriarch of Georgia. And those condolences were perceived as a significant, friendly, and symbolic signal. What do you think will be further practical and diplomatic impetus? In your opinion, what could follow such steps? And following up on your statement at the previous briefing that the ball is not in Russia's court, what actions on the part of Georgia could further this impetus? Actually, I would like to reply to your today question, and I have taken this homework from the previous briefing. Yes, it was actually a deep grief in Russia, the death of Patriarch. He was a true spiritual leader, and he protected traditional values and Orthodox unity. So he was respected in the entire Christian world. You have enumerated the steps by the Russian authorities in order to convey officially our condolences to the people of Georgia. Regarding relations with Georgia, our peoples, I would repeat once again, are bound by the closest historical ties. Despite well-known political differences on some issues, we encourage the development of bilateral cooperation. It appears that the Georgian side is also interested in constructive relations with Russia. Interaction with our country is one of the key factors behind the unprecedented growth of the Georgian economy. I would emphasize that our ties with Georgia are natural and not artificially imposed by someone. And we do not allow to impose such approach on us by the West or by anyone else. So it's about economic interaction and people-to-people contacts. Russia is a key trading partner for Georgia in 2025. Yes, as I have promised, I took that data from experts. The trade turnover grew by 6%, reaching $2.7 billion. Russia accounts for 2/3 of Georgia's wine exports, 90% of fruit, 40% of lemonades and mineral water. This demonstrates that our capacious market remains Georgia's priority, and CIS countries account for 70% of Georgia's exports, many times more than the EU's share. Why compare with the EU? It testifies about the lack of a clear result from the Georgia-EU Free Trade Agreement signed in 2014. It's just propaganda. It remains only propaganda. No one in Brussels intended to open their market to Georgian goods. But 12 years went by. What was the obstacle? It was only about words. Now they just offer to the region's countries, just distracting them from the truth, just showing them some distractive objects, and actually nothing happens. And Russia is a key supplier of strategically important goods to Georgia, energy and grain. The decisions adopted by our leadership in 2023, it was very important to resume direct flights and a visa-free regime for Georgian citizens. Today, the Air flights are conducted in more than 20 directions, connecting 3 Georgian and 11 Russian cities. The tourist flow increased to 1.6 million people. Every 4th tourist in the Republic in Georgia is from Russia. And it's about the development of Georgian tourism industry and increasing the number of pilgrimages to Georgia. Russians travel there not for exotic things, but to venerate Georgian holy sites. This will be a further occasion to do that. It's one more eloquent testimony of common culture and history of the two people. We stand on the same spiritual foundation and defend the same values.
We're sincerely glad that the context between our two peoples and the economic cooperation is developing accordingly. Now on to political dialogue with Georgia. I can only repeat one thing. If Tbilisi is ready for that, Moscow will not avoid goal-oriented discussion. The rejection of dialogue with Russia, as well as tragical events of 2008, are a part of the heritage of a criminal and reckless regime of Saakashvili. In its rationale to actually rationally justify the advantages of such an approach that Georgia used to take, and we hope that Tbilisi, realizing the true goals of the West in regards to the country, will understand that cooperating with Russia is better than confronting it, and this is a position that is backed by facts. And the challenges that our peoples, our countries have faced have become doubtlessly a very powerful provocation that has been prepared for a long time, and fortunately was stopped in its tracks, and it didn't go any further in the deepest part that it was prepared to serve by the West, not only for our country but the entirety of the region. The region is rich in natural resources and represents a unique geological and ecological point of the planet, possessing all types of natural riches, from resources to, of course, culture, history, art, etc. And you understand this always causes envy and desire to be destructive and inflict damage and unleash chaos and disorder. This is a desire of some select structures on our planet. Unfortunately, they do still exist. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is the Chinese media cooperation with us? Yes. Well, we have two questions. You already answered one of them. Thank you very much. I'll answer the second question. Currently, on the island of Hainan, we have the Boao Asian Forum, where Russia is represented on a high level. Asia is currently being called locomotive of the global economic growth, with its role becoming more important than before. How does Russia view the multilateral cooperation with the Asian countries in the forming markets? What are expectations of the Russian side in regards to the existing forum and the prospects of its development? In the current moment of geopolitical tension, we see the growing significance of dialogue structures helping reinforce regional cooperation and elaborate exact avenues of growing trade and economic cooperation. Among such formats are the Boao Asian Forum and the Eastern Economic Forum in Russia. They are depoliticized and representative and especially oriented towards the Asia-Pacific region, rich in history and tradition, and they are, of course, extremely effective. The organizers of the ongoing Asian Forum, Boao, are raising the topics concerning the relevant economic tendencies in the world, especially We see the discussion of digital economy and managing artificial intelligence, good environment for trade and investments, development of cross-border payment and electronic commerce. This is especially important for Russia because we are interacting both with our Chinese friends and other partners from Asia. We're interested in broadening our connection with the Chinese Forum. Representative of Russia is among the board of directors of the forum, and we will always be happy to host the Secretary General of the Bao Asian Forum, Chan Zun, at the Eastern Economic Forum. We also think it necessary to invite representatives of multilateral associations situated in Eurasia to such events. The forum is hosting the heads of executive authorities of some international structures such as ASEAN, SCO, CICA, the Asian Development Dialogue, Asia Cooperation Dialogue, and also these representatives are also visiting the Eastern Economic Forum, where we see the work conducted by the EU, APEC, and the SCATO. This also helps reinforce the context between the business circles of those countries. So we wish all the success and productive discussions at the Bao Asian Forum, and we also hope for broad representation at Eastern Economic Forum. Is Bolt News with us? Yes, good afternoon. In Lithuania, there was a cancellation of a singer and an ex-participant of the modern talking duo, Dita Bolin. I finally got this question. I hoped for us to discuss this question during the briefing. Let's talk about Dita Bolin at the briefing. Yes. Also, they cancelled the performance of Croatian violin player Stepan Hauser because he dared to perform Kalinka. Why are the Baltic states the most frequent suspects when Russian language is Russian culture is cancelled? And it is just puzzling to see when we see different people who are performing Tchaikovsky, Mussorgsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, and other composers, and it would be very terrible to see for everyone who knows who Vrubleva, Vysotsky, and other great painters are, who are familiar with the actions of Russian museums, and who know about the theater of Stanislavski, smaller theater, and other our theaters. We're not even talking about the performers. We're talking about the Respublic regime, who is responsible for such commandments. They cannot, in reality, cancel anything. They change some logos, labels, and that's it. Then they run out of money, and they started to focus more on their real task at hand, trying to control the damage. Periodically, just resorting to some petty acts. What we are witnessing is just nationalism transforming into neo-Nazism. Thank you. Thank you. Is Lenta.ru with us? Now, yes, Madam Zakharova, we have on the 20th of March, the Parliament of Moldova adopted a resolution condemning the so-called pollution of the Dniester River as a result of the Armed Forces of Russian Federation strike against the Ukrainian infrastructure. According to the document, a lot of oil products have been discharged into the river, which created a serious threat for the health of the population, including the possible cancerogenic influence. How could you comment the adoption of this resolution by the Moldovan parliament? There is nothing to be surprised about. For many years, official Chisinau has been regularly accusing Russia of practically everything. Economic, financial problems, Russia is always to blame. The situation in the security sphere is aggravating. Moscow is to blame. Unfortunately, the demography is declining. Moscow is to blame too. Everything they are blaming on us. Now the environment is getting worse, and Moscow is also once again to blame. Even the Moldovan citizens themselves, they think that This is suspicious, and there are no clear circumstances described of this incident taking place, no credible evidence, but nevertheless it doesn't stop them from accusing Russia. It begs a question in regards to the sending of samples of the decontaminated water for analysis for some reason to Bucharest. I don't know. Don't they have any laboratories in Moldova? Probably they do. Why sending the samples to Bucharest then? I don't know. Why are they doing that? It's obvious. And the very same day, on 20th of March, the Parliament of Moldova voted in favor of denouncing 3 basic CIS treaties. They just needed to mask this act by some other news story justifying the sudden denunciation of those documents. Another coincidence is a statement of Maya Sandu, the President of Moldova, of March 23rd, regarding the feasibility of Moldova joining the so-called coalition of the willing. For Moldovans who are visiting Russia, who are working in Russia, who are witnessing good neighborly relations, how do you explain to them that suddenly you need to act against Russia, especially in that overt way, join something that, pardon my French, has clearly gotten stale, has gotten rotten. The worsening situation with the Dniester is another justification to justify their actions, having nothing to do with the well-being of the citizens. Exactly on the contrary, leading to the situation becoming worse. Please, Newsroom. Yes, we have 2 questions today. How does Moscow evaluate the risk of possible occupation or blockade of the Kharg Island by the United States, which is a key node of exports of Iranian oil? What consequences for regional stability, global energy prices, and interests of Russia would this scenario entail? The worsening of the situation in the Middle East has already, as you know, I'm convinced that you're familiar with the numbers, has led to the rupture of 20% of all global shipments of hydrocarbons and fuel. We already mentioned that at the previous briefing, due to the significant damage of more than 40 facilities of fuel and energy infrastructure of the Persian Gulf countries and the practical blockade of the Hormuz Strait, the market daily is lacking 50 million barrels of oil and 4.5 million barrels of oil products. And according to the International Energy Agency, gas has increased in price by 85% in recent time and is currently trading around $600-700 for 1 cubic meter. The Brent oil has increased in price by 54%, currently at the level of $100 per barrel. Such significant and sudden growth in price of energy has led to the ramifications for the entirety of the manufacturing production chain. We also need to take into account the significant influence of the political events for the global prices. Against the backdrop of the significant growth in price hike of oil and gas, and due to the risk for the world economy, President Donald Trump has postponed his threat to damage Iranian energy system for 5 days. As we see, the prices have significantly decreased in the time, but then they have started raising back. We don't preclude any of these scenarios because we cannot really forecast any developments in the region and the reaction of markets. We call on the de-escalation. We also hear about the speculation about the so-called land operation in the Kharg Island, but hope this will not come to it because the results of the already accomplished facts are enough for us. And my second question: as a result of the standoff in the Middle East, the United States has to withdraw the personnel from the bases in the region. According to the media, recently the United States base was transferred from Baghdad to Jordan. How does the Russian MFA evaluate the evacuation of the American military bases from some Arab states? Will this positively influence the situation in the region? We don't usually comment on the bilateral relations of two sovereign states, but we need to note that the current dramatic situation in the Persian Gulf are telling in saying that the presence of the United States Armed Forces in the region, instead of reinforcing security, creates additional threats for all countries of the region. Thank you very much. Is Newsfront with us? Yes, good afternoon. One question, if you allow me. How would you evaluate the new accusation raised against Russia that the main person to blame for the growth of migration to Europe in the last 10 years is the Russian President Vladimir Putin? This statement was made by the EU Commissioner on Internal Affairs and Migration, Magnus Brunner, in his interview to Financial Times. I'll just ask for clarification and just ask for we are being accused of worsening the environment in Moldova and migration problems in Europe. If we talk about this seriously, there is nothing new and nothing true about such statements. We have given numerous evaluations and comments to the statements from Brussels, now trying to shift the blame for the refugee flow to Europe onto Russia. All accusations of Western countries in regards to the Russian culpability in the world migration crisis is another attempt to lift the responsibility for their own misdeeds and find someone to blame, find scapegoats to cover up their own failings in the migration policy. Let's just remind them what the situation was in reality in the last decade. It's a direct consequence of a reckless and short-sighted interference into internal affairs of sovereign states of the Middle East and North Africa to destabilize them and forcefully change the regime. Just remember the so-called Arab Spring. That's the root of the existing current problems when it comes to migration. This led to a collapse of statehood, humanitarian catastrophes, civil wars, and growth of terrorism. Before that, we saw the situation around Iraq. Parallel with that, we had the so-called Arab Spring, pseudo-Arab Spring. Then we saw Libya, Syria, and so on and so forth. We can give dozens of other examples. Permanent threat to livelihood, lack of fundamental rights and freedoms has led to mass refugee flows from that region. Just look at our statements from the period. We have always warned against it. We have always warned what this would lead to. And the European Union officials just responded saying that they would handle it, and now they're blaming us. The states that actively participate in such interference, that have been unleashing conflicts, should have realized long ago that they are the ones who bear the brunt of the blame for the consequences and the mass flow of migrants and refugees. Today, thousands of people are still daily risking their life trying to reach Europe. And what about Ukraine? Didn't the European countries, the US, Canada, were engaged in destabilizing the situation for decades, destabilizing the regime, trying to conduct a coup d'etat? That was them, of course. Brussels is continuing to neglect the situation in the Mediterranean, where the inaction of corresponding border services of Europe continue to lead to thousands of deaths every year. At the same time, we see them forcing out potential asylum seekers and not allowing them to enter Europe. This is all being done in violation of international legal norms in the area of protecting rights of refugees. European capitals actively preventing access to their territory and preventing access to asylum procedures, and are trying to shift the obligations to other countries. We've seen this many times before, because this was highlighted, for example, by the UNHCR. until the West stops interfering into sovereign states of other regions, the problem will not cure itself, and they don't want that. So they resort to blaming Russia. Is Ross Media with us right now? Just a couple of questions more. Is Ross Media with us? Information agency of Ross Media. We have two questions. This year, India is chairing the BRICS, and they are at the same time they are growing cooperation with the United States and their allies. What is the strategy of Russia not to lead the situation to the breakdown of main consensual mechanism and basic principles of BRICS? What events with the petition of Russia will be key in the nearest months?
We respect the right of each state to develop contacts with other countries, considering their own national interests and strategies. We have no doubt in the sovereign character of the decisions of New Delhi. This is the basis of our relations with India. We have a privileged strategic partnership with this country. We have never had any reason to doubt the interest of our Indian friends to developing cooperation within BRICS. We can have various stances on certain topics and situations. However, we are united in the issue that this alliance is very important. It is important to preserve. We, of course, support priorities of BRICS work for this year declared by our Indian friends. We are sure that through joint efforts we will have to come to the next summit of BRICS in September this year with tangible achievements. We are prepared to facilitate interaction in reforming institutions of global management, increasing of the share of settlement in national currencies and other topics. We expect to continue work on Russian initiatives, including the mechanisms of insurance platforms. One of the key events on the political track, besides the traditional meeting of the leaders, there will be the Council of Foreign Ministers of BRICS countries. This will be a good opportunity to discuss the relevant issues on the international agenda. Question 2. Earlier, there were speculations in the media about disrespecting the G.A.Aliyev in Russia. I cannot believe that. I cannot believe that there are people who came up with this. I don't know why you, as a journalist, are paying attention to this, but there are a lot of fakes, there are a lot of provocations. One cannot pay attention to all of them. This won't help us. We should pay attention to the principled position, and it is expressed many times, especially in the run-up to the anniversary events, including here in Russia. There was a number of them. Even I, as a official representative of the MFA, gave interviews to Moscow, Baku. If I'm not mistaken, it was May 2023. I will provide the link in the text of the briefing today to this interview. I never knew him personally, but I read and heard a lot of him. There were also statements that I made dedicated to 100 years since the birthday of G.A.Aliyev. I cannot believe that you can believe those journalists that came up with this lie. I'm also shocked that you ask me this question. It is not asked by the Azerbaijani journalist. He, for some reason, and I hope it was not somebody else's orders. They started to stop visiting our briefings. In this case, they could have first-hand answers to their questions. If you remember, we always had representatives of Azerbaijan. I don't want such articles to be published. Nothing like this ever happened. But we are always happy to see everyone, all representatives of all countries. There's another thing I would like to note. We shouldn't give in to the provocations of those who want to incite us against each other. We should take note of their principled position. It was communicated many times to the public. We do this with great respect, real, sincere respect to our partners and our common past and history colleagues. Now I have to wrap up the briefing. I will answer all your questions. Thank you very much. See you next time. I wish you all the best.